In summer of 2014, I accepted Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. Just 7 years later, I didn't have a suspicion, but in fact, I was thoroughly convinced that I was Jesus. This happened under some very unique circumstances that are particular to my situation, and I'm going to delineate those circumstances over the course of this video. But before we get into it, I just want to preface the rest of this by saying I am okay now. I am stable now. I am sane now. I know that I am not Jesus. I know that I am not the Messiah. I'm just an ordinary human being. I'm Tyler Adolfo. I'm certainly not a saint. I don't claim to be anything other than a normal human being. Although my behavior could reasonably convince someone that I was anything but normal that fall semester of 2021. It was my junior year of university, and things started off well. I had a well-paying job with the Chamber of Commerce, local to my college town. I held a couple positions within my college frat, chair of public relations. I managed the social media. I was a chapter historian. And I was doing well academically early into that semester. And I had done well academically up until that point over the course of all my semesters at this university. But then there was a steady progression of delusional beliefs, of paranoid delusions. And I didn't have the insight, and this was the most terrifying thing, to know that there was something wrong with me. It was too late by the time I did recognize there was something wrong with me. I will say, early into the semester, I was unusually charismatic. I am naturally a highly introverted person, and it was totally antithetical to my character to be so smooth with the ladies or to be so charismatic when talking to anyone. And I had this ability to make people laugh, not at me, but with me. And I was just a superstar. I felt like a celebrity in the way that I interacted with people. Early into mania, I went for one of my Masonic degrees. I was working my way through the degrees at the time. I'm a Freemason. And I remember after one of the Masonic degrees that I went through, feeling an even more unusual, bolstered sense of confidence, a greater sense of purpose. I felt closer to God. I felt like I had more reason to live. Not that I was depressed and was looking for one, but I wasn't really quite sure which area of life was the proper fit for me. And I finally felt like I had that sense of purpose. And with the frat, I had that sense of belonging. I had the socialization that I craved, even as an introvert. I started to develop this kind of illusion of productivity. But I did start off initially very productive. What I was dealing with, I'll just let you know, is a bipolar manic episode. I did not know what bipolar disorder was. I did not know that I had bipolar disorder. Over the course of the semester, I would get incredibly agitated when anybody would suggest that there was something wrong with me. Things really started to pick up speed when I went 5 days in a row without sleeping. And I know you're immediately going to ask, why'd you go 5 days in a row without sleeping? That's crazy. Well, everything about this story is crazy. If you haven't figured that out by now, buckle up, because we're only just getting started. As Winston Churchill said, this is not the end. This is not even the beginning of the end. Rather, it's an end to the beginning. We got the beginning out of the way. That's it. There was a major protest against one of the other college frats on campus over an alleged sexual assault allegation. And as somebody who was sexually assaulted when I was a child, something that was very traumatizing for me, I took the initiative to use the social media platform of my fraternity to spread awareness about sexual assault, to draw attention to resources, and to raise funds for organizations that help sexual assault survivors. I devoted hours into this project. I assiduously toiled and neglected my own personal well-being. This was really at my expense. I put so much energy and effort into this project, and to a significant degree, it worked out. I actually got interviewed by a reporter from the New York Times. That New York Times article is still up there, and in the article, the bigger conversation is about fraternity protests and Greek life culture and rape culture within many fraternities. But there's a point in the article where they talk about the interview with me. There's a few paragraphs, and it links to the sexual assault fundraiser / awareness campaign that I had organized. I remember one of my brothers saying, "Someone get Tyler a horse tranquilizer," because that's how tired I was and people could see it. As I mentioned, I went 5 days without sleeping. Not one, not two, 5. And I'm sure we've all had a moment in our lives where we maybe went a day without sleep. Maybe for less of us, 2 days without sleep. I went 5 days without sleep. And I do believe this was one of the major triggers to my manic episode. Or at the very least, I believe it's what intensified and exacerbated the symptoms of mania that I was going through. I became increasingly agitated as the semester went on. I became even antagonistic and accusatory towards those around me, especially towards my fraternity brothers. I started to develop these delusions of grandiosity, especially after the New York Times article mentioning of me and my efforts in that campaign and the outpouring of support I got in the community at this university because of all the work I had put in that campaign. And I think that, combined with the Masonic degree and just feeling this reinvigorated sense of purpose, sense of belonging, I felt like I was on top of the world. And that's the thing with bipolar disorder. It's a mood disorder at heart. And it comes with its high highs and low lows. And these moods come with a myriad of symptoms. I was, at this point, in psychosis. I lost touch with reality. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly how these beliefs developed, but I know they transpired. I've spoken with people who interacted with me during this time. I recall a great deal of what transpired during this time. But not everything. And I attribute that partly to mania is such a destructive, traumatic force, and I think part of the recovery process was trying to create some separation between myself and these memories. And it's been close to 5 years now since this episode. So another thing is this agitation I felt. I felt like people didn't believe what I was saying, and it makes sense to me now that this was the case because I was saying nonsensical things. I thought at one point that I was related to John F. Kennedy, and that's a belief that I would adhere to till the end of my mania. I even started to develop an accent where I would speak with a Kennedy accent, which I will not attempt here. I thought I was related to the Kennedy family. I thought that I was JFK Jr. And it bothered me that people didn't believe me. I became so hostile towards those who questioned what I was saying. And people started to distance themselves from me as a result. My activity spiked considerably during this period of time. I've always been someone who took my steps very seriously. I took being in shape very seriously. But during mania, it was on a whole different level, a whole different planet of activity. I was averaging anywhere from 30 to 40,000 steps per day in any given week. And I actually have a memory where I was talking to some of my frat brothers downstairs, and my frat brothers saw me walking around at all times, and one of them asked me out of curiosity, like, what my step count on my phone is. I asked them, "What's yours?" So they took out theirs, and one of them had like 7,000, and this was like middle of the day, maybe like 2, 3 p.m. Another person had like 9,000 steps, and they got those steps. They accumulated them from just going to their classes, going to work, what have you. And then we look at my phone, and mind you, it's 2, 3 p.m. and it says 33,000 steps, something of that nature. And I remember them asking, Tyler, where'd you go? Like, what have you been doing to get 33,000 steps? I mean, that's absurd. It's especially that early in the day, and I probably hit 50,000 by the end of the night. But I just mentioned that to give some context as to how my activity rapidly increased. My delusion of believing that I was related to the Kennedys coincided with an emergence of conspiratorial beliefs. I started to believe that as a result of me being a Kennedy, that the Illuminati were after me. I felt like at one point the Masons, mind you, I'm a Mason. I thought the Masons were after me. And that kind of switched on and off. There were times where I thought the Masons were allies, and then other times where I thought they were after me. And of course, they were never after me at any point. They're my brothers, they're close friends. But in that delusional state, I was of a totally different belief and perspective. I started heavily exploring conspiracies about 9/11, the music industry, and devil worship in the music industry, and celebrities selling their souls. And I would post about these things on social media. I had this sporadic behavior where I would post nonsensical beliefs across my social media platforms. I disseminated them everywhere, on Facebook groups of my local community, on my Snapchat, on my Instagram, which ended up getting banned, as my Snapchat got banned too, on my Twitter. And I actually recently just deleted one of the Twitter accounts that I had posted on while manic, just because it's so cringe, and I can't bear to look through it. It just brings up this traumatic period of my life where I lost touch with reality. I began to see patterns where none existed. I became fascinated with the idea of numerology, more specifically gematria, which is the ancient practice of coding words into numbers and vice versa. And just to give an idea how this works, so the letter A would be 1, a numerology of 1. The letter C would be a numerology of 3. Well, my name, Tyler Adolfo, I figured had a numerology of 133. And you know what else had a numerology of 133? Government. And you know what else had a numerology of 133? White House. So I started posting a lot about politics, and I thought that I was destined for political greatness as a result of the numerology, right? The stars aligned in my favor. I started to feel persecuted when people wouldn't believe me, when people questioned what I said. I started to think that people were after me. I remember being at home and thinking that my house had been wiretapped, and I would tell my mom that there's cameras in the bathroom that are watching us, so we have to be careful. And I would sit down in specific parts of the house because I didn't want to be watched, like between the couch and a wall, to obscure the view of the cameras so that they couldn't get a good look at me. It didn't help that I went to the bus stop, and I can't remember why I was at the bus stop this particular day. I couldn't remember why I was in a lot of places at any given moment. I noticed that this particular bus stop, now in hindsight, that there's some interesting creatures there. Not creatures, but people, right? There's some interesting characters you run into. I was in a delusional state at this time where nobody was believing me about anything, and there was a guy who asked me for a cigarette, so I gave him a cigarette. He then hugs me and says, "I knew you would come back. You're Jesus." And it was like an epiphany moment to me, that I wasn't just related to the Kennedys. I wasn't just destined for political greatness, but in fact, there was something extra special about me. And this belief only intensified in the coming days. The JFK accent started to become a lot more frequent. It actually became permanent. I remember seeing a story about a bunch of QAnon conspiracy theorists holding a rally for the return of JFK Jr. And I almost like purchased tickets to go to that event as JFK Jr. I can't imagine how absurd that would have been. I wonder in hindsight whether or not people would have believed me there. I mean, based off the things those people believe, maybe they would have believed me. But I say this without judgment. I ended up speaking to a Catholic father about how upset I was. Arranged a private meeting. I talked about how upset I was about people not believing me, about people thinking that I'm crazy, and about how I'm being persecuted. And I told him how I was related to the Kennedy family and how I had a special purpose in this world. But I felt like I couldn't just reveal to him yet that I'm actually the Messiah, that I'm actually Jesus. When I mentioned I was related to the Kennedys, he stood up, went to the door, and he said, "I'll see what I can do for you. I'll see what I can do to help you." I left and shut the door and locked it immediately. And that was the last time I spoke to that Catholic father. But it wouldn't be my last interaction with a religious figure or religious authority. Man, this is tough. I was kind of hopping between locations at this time. I was going from my home back to the college campus, back to my family's in a neighboring community. And these locations are reasonably far from each other, about an hour drive between each of them. And at this moment in time, I was at my family's. And I thought at this time that one of my fraternity brothers was a Nazi agent and that he was orchestrating plans to harm the pledges. And so I came up with this plan. I devised this strategic plan of action where I was going to gather people from my hometown and bring them to my college town to confront this Nazi agent. I ordered a Hummer limo, which I would refer to on social media as my holy caravan. So I went from my family's to my hometown. I remember my family being shocked that a Hummer limo actually pulled up. I was talking real crazy, and they knew that there was something wrong with me, but weren't really sure what to do about it. And that was really the theme of this whole episode, is that people weren't sure what to do about it because they're not mental health experts, and there's not like a lot of people who are well read on the literature of mental health and what to do in these situations. So I don't pass judgment on them in hindsight. I remember telling the limo driver that I'll consider hiring him and he could be my personal limo driver, which he laughed at. I was making FaceTime calls with friends in my community, telling them about how we were going to confront this Nazi agent, and they're saying, I'm like, yeah, we got to confront this guy. He's going to harm the pledges. And they're like, Tyler, what are you talking about? And they would say, I got work tomorrow. Like, Tyler, it's midnight. What are you doing? I ended up FaceTiming another friend when we pulled into the McDonald's in my local town. We arrived at my hometown and we went to McDonald's. I went inside, ordered 4 iced coffees, all of which I ended up consuming throughout the rest of that night, rather quickly actually. Rest in peace to my bladder. I FaceTimed another friend while I was at the McDonald's. And then from McDonald's, we went from there to the Catholic Reactory, where there's always a volunteer. And it's a place where you could go. It's a sanctuary where you go to pray and feel a closer relationship with God. And in this moment where I felt persecuted, in this moment where I felt like I had nobody in my life who believed me about anything, I thought it appropriate to go to the Catholic Reactory. And my plan was to pray and get answers from God on what Jesus, the Messiah, can do. I went into the Catholic Reactory, and there was a guest list. And I remember writing on the guest list, I signed my name, and then I wrote, I'm back. I signed my name as Jesus and wrote, I'm back. I can't imagine what people who saw that on the guest list thought when they encountered it, but probably pretty angry, maybe confused. The volunteer who was there was definitely a bit spooked about the entire situation, and that makes a lot of sense because I was claiming to be Jesus and what have you. I then went home in the Hummer limo, and I had this fear. I lost trust in the limo driver, and it was something so absurd. Remember, I'm seeing patterns where none exist, and people on social media are ignoring me, laughing at me because of the things I'm posting. I held up a holy Bible that I got from the Catholic Reactory and took a selfie of myself while in the Hummer limo, and I also put the caption, "I'm back." Well, the limo driver kind of thought that I was acting very weird and crazy, and I had my phone like in a charger, and the charger suddenly broke, and I suspected that the limo driver, who was like questioning if I was okay, if there was something wrong with him, or like he's been exposed to this virus as well, where people aren't believing me and people are questioning me. And it made me feel like I couldn't trust him. So went inside my home, and I remember running away from home, hiding behind some dumpsters, and coming home eventually. And my mom tells me that police had come to our apartment and ransacked my room and told me to give them a call when I could, and of which I of course did not. And it was because the limo driver was, I guess, concerned about my health, but also because I didn't pay the full amount of the limo ride. It was like 1,200, and I ended up paying 1,000. And it was under those circumstances that he called the police on me, and they came to my home. And I remember leaving a note to my mother before I left and hid behind the dumpsters, saying that this guy outside is working with the Nazi agents and he's coming after me. I'll explain more later, or something like that. And it was all just a very intriguing time. I was at home for the foreseeable future. I didn't end up returning to college campus. I did at one point, just once. But I started posting about Noah's Ark and how few will make it, few will survive what's coming. And I remember posting a Timothy Chalamet, the actor, a scene from one of his movies where he stabs somebody. It's in the movie The King, and he stabbed someone who betrayed him. And I put the caption, I put the scene, and then I put the caption on my Instagram story. As the caption, I had, "There will be treason trials at," and then I had my college name. So people knew there's something definitely wrong with Tyler Adolfo. This is totally antithetical to his character. I know in hindsight that that was the case. Very fortunately, I would eventually go into a treatment program, a hospitalization program, and on my first day, February 23rd of 2022, mind you, this manic episode started in October of 2021, and it's now February, and I was still experiencing symptoms. I got put on an antipsychotic that rather quickly made my symptoms of mania abate. And as my manic symptoms abated, I started to have a realization that this progression of delusions I had were, well, delusions, that they weren't grounded in reality. And that was disappointing to me. I fell into a severe depression, and that's a whole different story. But I mentioned the hospitalization just because I want you to know that I am fine now. I'm doing okay now. I went on medical leave from college, and I ended up returning to college a few years later, thankfully. I thought, though, at one point that I would never work again, that I would never return to school, and that my relationships would never recover, and that part definitely was kind of true. I have made amends with some people, but for the most part, I've left those stones untouched. So my purpose in this video was not just to tell a story that I hope you found interesting, a story that certainly idiosyncratic in the way that I conducted myself. It definitely defies the normative standard in how people conduct themselves. I want you to know that I'm not proud of any of the delusions I had during mania, but especially thinking that I was Jesus, acting like I was Jesus. I'm a Christian at heart, and I know that it's blasphemous, but I was sick. I was mentally sick. I had an illness. I was suffering from a severe brain disorder, a manic episode. I was in psychosis. I lost touch with reality. And we could go into and enumerate the various triggers and things I could have, could not have done differently, but it's hard unless you were in my shoes to truly understand what it was like, because during it, I didn't know there was something wrong with me. I lacked the insight and discernment to know there was something wrong with me. And that's the most terrifying part of mania for me. And it's why I'm assiduously committed to taking my medications today. I'm stable today. And there were a lot of consequences of my mania, which I talk about in other videos. But I managed to recover, and I'm in a really phenomenal place right now. I'm excited about what the future holds, and I'm grateful when looking at where I was compared to where I am today. I hope that this video helps shed some light on how bipolar mania can manifest itself. That was another major reason why I decided to make this video, as embarrassing as it is. I mean, I've talked about many of my embarrassing experiences on this channel already, so I figured why not just discuss this one. I have been putting this one off for a long time. I've alluded to this delusion in videos, but I never got into the amount of detail that I have in this video. So with that, I appreciate you all being here, and hit that subscribe button if you're new. Check out some of my other content. I'm a mental health content creator. I have more than 100 videos in a playlist called Bipolar Breakdown, where I go into more depth about specific instances of this manic episode, the depression episode that followed, my recovery, how I'm doing today. I share strategies, routines, coping mechanisms on how I deal with this illness. And there's a lot of benefit to be found, whether you're bipolar or not bipolar, whether you know someone with bipolar as well, you know. So I'd appreciate it if you give some of my other content a check, but if not, I appreciate you tuning into this video. And with that being said, love, light, and tranquility to all.